Hello everyone, welcome to our Alteryx Server webinar series. So let's go ahead and get started for today. We have a pretty great audience already. Just a little background about me. I am Gabriel Vlela. I will be your host today. I am part of the data mini training and enablement team. I am a data engineer and Alteryx engineer as well here. I have a few Alteryx certifications if you're interested in those. And I have been working with Alteryx with over 4 years now. And if you want to add me on LinkedIn, feel free. You can even scan the QR code out to add me. Okay. So enough about me. A little bit about data meaning. So our services consist about creative services, business intelligence, data management, change management, delivery management, and education training. We are located in Florida, DC, New Jersey, Chicago, India, and Brazil. So those are all our markets. And we are a boutique of business intelligence and consultancy founded in 2005. We have quite a few software partners, as you can see here, some really important logos like Alteryx, Microsoft Azure, AWS, Snowflake, right? So they are all our partners that we work with, and we delivered their products. This is our agenda. So we started all the way at the beginning there, introduction to Alteryx Server, and today is session number 4, admin site overview. So we're gonna see a little bit more of the admin area for the Alteryx Gallery. Okay. So session number 4, Alteryx Server admin site overview. This is our agenda for today. So we're gonna start off talking about the gallery configuration. Then we're gonna talk about shared workspaces and studios, user settings, how to manage workflows, collections, data connections, and jobs. Those are the main points, but we're gonna go over every item on the menu that you have there on the admin area. We're gonna go into each one of them. And lastly, we have just a slide with the webinar series map and then Q&A at the end. Okay. So let's start off by accessing here the admin area for the gallery, right? So if you are what we call a curator, that means that you're the gallery admin and you're gonna have access to this area here that I have this screenshot, right? So this is the first page that you see, the diagnostics page. And this first page here is just a summary of what is happening on your server. So you can see here that you have how many apps you got there, right? So you can see how many total apps, published apps, and deleted apps. You can see some information about users, how many users you've got, and how many disabled users you've got, right? Collections, so the folders, right, that you can create to share workflows, those are the collections. And you can see here how many collections you've got, how many apps you've got in collections, and how many users in the collections you have. Some statistics about the server itself, like how many studios you have, shared credentials, how many schedules has been created, active jobs, and data connections. And also you're gonna see there if the AMP engine is available or not, right? So if it's enabled or not on that server. You can also see some information about the worker. So you can see there the worker machine name. On this case here, I only have one worker connected to this server, right? And it's a single node deployment, so I'm only gonna see one worker there. If I had a series of workers, I was gonna see here all them listed. I can see what is the CPU and memory consumption at that time, if I have AMP engine enabled on that worker or not. And on the right side, you're gonna see here a graph, right? A chart with the CPU and the memory consumption for the last hour for each worker, right? So if you had multiple workers, just click on the worker name and then the chart here will be updated to reflect that worker that you've selected on the menu there. So this is the diagnostic page, just a summary of what you have and what's happening at a glance, right, on your server. Moving on to the next item. So you can see here, we're gonna follow this menu here on the left side. We were on the first one, diagnostics, and then we moved to the second one, configuration. So here under the configuration area, we're gonna see some settings for first, the user. So we can set here the default row access, the default row level of access, right? So remember that we have 5 different level of access, right? So no access, viewer, member, artisan, and creator. You can set the default role here for all new users. This is really important because every new user that's coming and entering the gallery will have this role assigned to them. And it is important to, the best practice, right, is to have this set to either no access or viewer, which are the lowest possible level of access and permissions, right? Because you don't know what that user is going to need. That user will need to contact the gallery administrator in order to gain more privileges, right? So then after the user has already signed in, the user is there available for you under the admin area, then the user can ask, oh, I need access to collections, or I need to be able to publish workflows. Then the gallery administrator will be able to go over here under the user's area that we are going to see in a bit, and then change that role for that specific user. But the default role, I always encourage to set to either no access or viewer, right? There's also 2 other options at the bottom there. The users can register, and unregistered users can run public workflows. Those options will only be available if the authentication method for your server is set to built-in. So remember, we have a few options when we are installing the Alteryx server regarding authentication. One of them is the built-in. And when you choose the built-in, the Alteryx Gallery itself is going to manage all the users, right? It's not going to be connected to the Windows Active Directory or any other third endpoint, right? That you have the users there. It is going to be managed within the Alteryx Gallery itself. And only when you have that option that you're going to see these other 2 options here available for you to choose from, right? On this case here, I do not have a built-in authentication setup. I have a Windows authentication, so it's connected to the Windows Active Directory, right? So that's why I don't have those options available. They are grayed out. The next setting that I have is the workflow settings. So this is really straightforward, right? I have a flag here, yes or no, setting if creators can flag workflows for promotion. This option here is only used when you have multiple server environments. So you have, let's say, a sandbox environment and then a production environment. And you test workflows first on the sandbox before moving then onto production. And that process of moving workflows around, you need to set up a series of API calls behind the scenes, right? And those endpoints are triggered based on this flag here. So if creators can flag workflows for promotion or not, you're gonna do that in here, right? And that will trigger a series of API endpoints available for you to move workflows between environments. The next setting that we have is workflow credentials settings. So remember when you're saving a workflow to the gallery, you have the option to set the credential. And when you set the credential, it means that that user that you inserted will be the one that's going to be running the workflow under that credential, right? And you can share credentials among other users, right? That's one thing that you can do here. And on this option here is where you set if that is possible or not. So you have three options: use default credentials, require user credentials, or allow user to select. If you set to use default credentials, then the user will never be able to insert any other credentials other than the default. So all workflows will run with the system account, right? Always. If you require user credentials, that means that every workflow published to the gallery will require the user to insert some credential there, either their own or someone else's credential, right? They will need to insert some credentials there. And the last one is the option that you can leave up to the user if the user wants or not to do that. So you can allow the user to insert credentials or don't. Just run with the system, the default one, right? Gallery credentials now. So there's another area here if you scroll down called gallery settings. And this is really important because this setting here, users can schedule workflows. It is not enabled by default. So when you install Alteryx for the first time, right, the server for the first time, this setting here would not be enabled. And you might be wondering, oh, why don't I don't see the option to schedule, right? It's probably because you haven't enabled that. And you need to enable this global setting here first, right? So you have this option available. Then you can enable the schedule individually on each user that requires that, okay? You can also disable direct download. So if you disable direct download, users will not be able to download workflows directly from the gallery. When you open a workflow page here in the gallery, there are a few options that you can see there, like a buttons, right, to run the workflow, to schedule, and also to download. If you do not want users to be able to download workflows directly from the gallery, you can disable that in here. And that is particularly useful if you want just artisans to be able to download and manage and edit workflows, right? Because only artisans will be able to connect their Alteryx Designer to the server. And once you do that, you can download workflows from Alteryx Designer without having to access the gallery from the browser, right? So that is particularly useful if you want just artisans to be able to edit and see what's behind each workflow. Okay. And there's also a last option there, allowed hosts, right? If you want to specify any host or domain that are that is allowed there, you can mention that there. All right. So that is pretty much it for the configuration area. Now let's jump into subscriptions. So let's see here on the menu, subscriptions. That is the third option there. Just one thing here that I want to mention before I start explaining here about subscriptions is that the concept of subscriptions or studios, that those are the same thing, they will be disappearing on the near future. And if you already have the Alteryx Server version 2022.1, you probably saw this already, that we have a new area called shared workspace, right? That is going to be replacing the concept of studio. So this is more useful if you have an older Alteryx version. So how does the subscription works? those are the same as studios, right? So you can see here, this is called subscriptions, but here you see studio, right? So those are the same thing. Each user that gets added to the gallery will have its own studio. And the studio is used to um, hold onto the workflows that you share. So if an artisan publishes a workflow to the gallery, the studio for that artisan is the first place that the workflow will land. So all the workflows that you shared from Designer to the gallery will be inserted into your own user's studio. You can also create shared studios. So you can, let me just show the next one here. So you see this image now? I just clicked on one studio there, the data science studio. And you can see here that I have 2 users added to this studio, right? So you can add multiple users to the same studio, and then all the workflows that are shared within that studio, the users that have access to that studio will be able to edit those workflows, right, and publish new versions of those workflows. And they will also be able to manage past versions, right? So if those users want to download past versions of those workflows, they will be able to. And there are some other options here that you can set around API. So this is really important here, right? The API enablement. If you are working with APIs that require access to the studio, this is the area where you set that permission. Okay. You can also specify here if shared schedules are enabled for that studio or not, and if you want to set a default workflow credentials, right, for that particular studio. Another thing that I want to mention is that one user can only be present at one studio at a time. So the same user cannot be on multiple studios at the same time. One user per studio, okay? And again, this concept here of studios, they will be going away in the near future. For the 2022.1 update, all workflows that are shared with you, like through collections, right? The users are already able to update new versions of those workflows, right? They don't need to be added to the same studio anymore. The only basic difference here is if a certain user needs to be able to see and download past versions of a certain workflow, then you need to be added to this studio where the workflow is sitting in. All right, so that is pretty much it for the concept of subscriptions or studios. Now, user management. This is a really important area. And the first thing that I want to say is that you don't see any button here to add users, right? So you can search, you can filter, but there's no add button. That is because this setup here, this server setup is set to Windows authentication using the Active Directory. And you can even see here the domain, right? So domain / the user. This is a characteristic of Windows Active Directory. And when you have that set up, you're not going to be able to manually add users to it. The way that you add users is asking the user to access the gallery URL. Once the user hits that URL, then that user will be automatically added to this database here, right? And the user will be present here. Then you can locate that user. The first time that the user lands on this area, the user's area here, will have that default row. So you see the row here. You're gonna see the default row here, and that will reflect what you have inserted under the configuration area for the default row. And if you want to change from the default row to, I don't know, artisan or curator, right? Then you need to go over here, find that user, and change that row manually. Okay. If you click on any user here, it is gonna open up this page where you can see here some permissions that you can set. So Andrew Kim here, it is a curator, and you can set here some permissions. And by default, all actions here will be set to no, other than the active, right? So just the active will be as default. So scheduled jobs will be set to no by default. If you need a user to be able to schedule jobs, you will need to enable that on that user manually, right? So you need to open that user page and enable that option here manually. Same for prioritizing jobs, assign jobs, create collections, and API access. The option to prioritize jobs is only used if you want the user to be able to set a higher permission for their job. Like you can, the user will be able to set a permission level, I don't know, 1 and urgent, right? And then that particular workflow will skip the queue, will skip the line and go first. I don't particularly recommend having this set to yes, because every user will think that their workflow is more important than the others, right? So be really careful with this option here. And assign jobs, this option here is only used if you have multiple worker machines. And if you set this to yes, the user will be able to select on which worker they want to run that particular workflow. Let's say you have multiple workers machines, and then one worker is more powerful than the other, has more RAM, CPU, right? And you know that you're gonna run a workflow that requires more processing power, then you can set that particular workflow to run on that worker machine that you know that's more powerful than the others, right? So that's the use here for the assign jobs. But again, choose this wisely, right? Who you're gonna give this permission. Create collections. So if the user will be able to create collections or not, this is pretty straightforward, right? And if that user has API access or not. The last one, it's really important to mention as well, because you are not going to be able to delete users from the gallery. Once the user is added, it is not possible to delete that user. The only action that you have is to set the level of access here, right? The permissions to no here under the active option. So if you set this to no access, then the user will not be able to access the gallery anymore. And you can also see here the groups that this user is in, right? So this user here, it's on one group called enablement. And where can you set that? It's under the group area here, right? Okay, so those permissions, right, to create collections, schedule, prioritize jobs. And here under groups. So if you go under groups, then you have the add button there, right? So you see the plus there. So here you're going to be able to add groups. You can manually create a group. So you can see these first two here are type custom. That means that I have manually created those groups and manually added users to it. Or you can add a Windows Active Directory group, as you see here for the last one. Okay. One important thing here to mention about this groups area is the row. You can set a default row for that group. And it's really important to mention that the row that is set here for the group will override the setting that you have for the configuration area as the default row. So let's say you have a Windows Active Directory group here. That group is set to default row curator. But you remember here that you had the configuration setting there as the default row no access, right? So the user cannot see anything. If a user from this Windows Active Directory group is added, access the gallery, their default row will be curator. So this will override what you have under the configuration, okay? Just keep that in mind. And this is really important to mention because you're not gonna see which row that user has under the users area. You're just gonna see default there, it's written, right? But you don't know what that default is unless you know that that user is from a certain group here, okay? So that is really important to keep in mind. Okay, yeah, so this is the button to add a new group, right? So we can create a custom group there. You can choose from Active Directory, and once you click on the group name, then you're going to be able to add users to it, right? So you can see here this add button. You can add users to it, and you can manage the users clicking on the added button. So pretty straightforward, right? All right, so that is about it for the users. Now on to workflow management. This workflow management area here, you're going to be able to see every workflow from the gallery. You're going to have a list here from every workflow, right? And then you can filter workflows. You can enable these checkboxes here, right, to flag them and see if you have any apps or anything there. And you can browse through all of them there. If you click on any workflow name, then you're gonna see this area here, this new page, where you can change a few settings here. So you can change the run mode, the worker assignment, and some other permissions here at the bottom, as you can see, right? But you cannot change like the workflow name or where the workflow is sitting in, right? Like the studio. You cannot change that from this area here. Only the owner of the workflow will be able to change the workflow name or where the workflow is sitting in, okay? There's also an area for tags. So you can add tags here, and tags are quite useful if you want to manage workflows, right? And those are going to be used also on the search, so that we'll have to search. So it's pretty useful, and you can also set some flags here that only admins can use. Okay, now moving on to collections. So this is the area where you're gonna see every collection that this server has, right? And you can see here the same view as you would see if you were a user from that collection, right? You can see the name, the owner, create date, how many workflows, how many users, right? And if you click on any collection name here, it is gonna take you to the collections page where you can see all the assets. So you can see here every workflow and analytic app or macro that you have added to that particular collection. But it's important to mention that you're not going to be able to manage the assets. So you don't see any edit or delete or any thing here around the assets, right? So you're not going to be able to manage assets from the admin area. If you want to manage assets for a particular collection and you are the admin, you will need to add yourself to that collection and then go to the user area, find that collection and manage the assets there on the user side. Okay. What the admin can do here is change the owner. So the admin can change the owner of that collection. All right. So moving on to districts. So districts are like folders for public workflows. So if you have public workflows, you can separate them into districts. And the way that you create the district is by adding a tag to that district. So remember, you'll need to first create a tag under the workflow area here. Then you can create a district that will leverage a tag, and that tag will be tied to that particular district. So every workflow that is public and also has that tag, on this example here, finance, that workflow will be pulled into that district, right, automatically, right? So you're not going to be able to uh, manually add workflows to districts. Workflows will be pulled in automatically to districts based on the tag and if the workflow is public, right? Data connections. So this is a really important area now. You can create data connections here and share those connections with users. It is highly encouraged to use this area here for data connections to share connections among all designer users rather than having the designer users create connections on their own on their machine, right? It is much better to control every database access through here, right? So you can easily see who has access to what, right? The way that I do that, it's really simple. Just click on the add connections button there, and then you're gonna see this area here. You have three options to add a data connections: Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, or other. If you choose Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle, then you're gonna see this nice area here, right, where you can insert the connection name, the host, right, the username and password. You can change that in here for Microsoft SQL Server and Oracle. For those two, if you add the connection here and share that with designer users, those designer users will only need to have the correct driver installed on their machine. However, if you choose the other, right, so if you're connecting to some other database other than Oracle and SQL Server, you will need to insert here the connection string. So you need to know how to build the connection string in order to insert that here. And the connection string most often requires the DSN to be listed in there. So the user will need to have the correct driver and DSN on their machine, unless you know how to build a DSN-less connection string, right? So if you don't know anything, if you're lost, right, what I just talked, you need to contact your IT team and they will be able to help you set up connection strings. Okay, so it is pretty simple, right? Just create the connection. You just need to know the connection string correctly, and you're gonna have that connection available here. Next step is to share that connection with users. So you can click there, and then you can select any user from here or groups, right, of users, and then add those here. So all those users will be able to leverage that data connection from their designer. Okay. All right. Moving on to the next one here, credentials. So as I mentioned before, right, you're able to share credentials with other users. And this is particularly useful if users have workflows that requires level of access to specific folders, right? That the default system account that runs all workflows doesn't have access to. So you can set specific credentials to run workflows. And if a certain user doesn't have a specific credential, right, or level of access, permissions, whatever, you can share another credential with that user, so that user will be able to use that credential in order to run their workflows. So this is the area where you do that, right? You just click the add credentials button, and then you add the credential here, your username and password. Then you just click on that credential there, and you're going to be able to add users that will be able to leverage that specific credential. Okay. Now moving on to the jobs. So this here, jobs, right? This is the area where you can see first the job queue. So here you see status. This is the job queue. Currently on this screenshot here, I don't have anything on the queue. You're going to be able to see scheduled workflows. So all schedules that have been created, they will all be listed here. You can click on any schedule name, and then you can edit that schedule, right? So you are the admin, you can add that schedule. You can change the recurrency if you want, right? You can edit that schedule if you need. And you also have the option to migrate. So that last option, migrate, it is not used as much because this is for jobs that have been scheduled locally on designer machines, right? But people don't often do that because it's not recommended, not best practice. But if you have scheduled jobs on user machines, right, that are running locally on the designer, you can migrate those jobs to be running under the gallery scheduler. Okay. Uh, the next area here is the shared, sorry, not shared, schedule forecast. So here you're gonna have a really good understanding of how many jobs you have scheduled for each half an hour time slot throughout the day, right? So you're gonna have the full week here, and then all the hours here, and then for every 30-minute slot, you're gonna see how many jobs you have on that slot. And this is particularly useful if you want to see like, oh, do I have um, too many jobs running at a certain period of time, right? So you can very easily see that as on this screenshot here, right? You can see a few of them that have 8 jobs to run on that particular time slot. And then you can do the math of uh, how much time is required to run all the jobs, right? So on this example here, I have one worker machine and 2 concurrent workflows at a time. That's the setting that I have. So the total runtime capacity is 1 times 2 times 30, which means 60 minutes for each 30-minute slot. That's my availability, right? If I have 6 jobs to run on that 30-minute slot, that means that I have 30 divided by 60, 0.5 of ratio and shade, right? So that is my ratio of availability and jobs that I have scheduled. And you can compare that with this shaded table here, that you can see if you have a number that is in between 0 and 1, that is good. Between 1 and 1.2, you need to be careful. If it's higher than 1.2, then something is wrong there. You need to look at it because you have more jobs to run than time available. Okay. Then the last four options that we have here on the menu, it's pretty simple, right? It's just some things that you can change, like theme. You can change the color. You can change the logo here. You can make this really look like an internal page from your organization. The media area, you can add the banner, right, that users will see when they access the gallery. So you see here this home page, right, that has that banner. It's here that you insert that. You can create pages to guide users through it, right? So you can create pages here telling users how to leverage data connections, right? Internal pages within the gallery. And you can link those pages in here, creating those links, right? The links here will be available for the user on this area here. So you see this link icon there on the user side. If you hover your mouse there, then you're gonna see all the links pop up there. So you see Google Data Connection, Data Science. Those are the ones that I created here. And you can point that to wherever location you want, internal page or external. And the last one is notifications. So you can change here how each notification that is sent out from the server looks like. So you can click on that, right? And then you can change the text, the font, color, whatever you want there to manage those emails that are being sent out from the gallery. Okay. All right. So that is pretty much it for this admin area here. All the other slides here is just a recap of what we've seen already. And let me jump into the Alteryx Server webinar series map. So the next session here will be next Wednesday, admin best practice, right? And that is aimed for the gallery administrator and the server administrator. This is our offerings related to Alteryx Server. So if you need any help around enablement and training for the Alteryx Server, we are here to help. Server installation, migration processes, server health check, right? And we do all that. All right, that is pretty much it. Thank you all for your attendance. I hope you guys enjoyed, and we have now some time here for Q&A if you guys have any questions. Let me see the Q&A here. There is one question here. Can we run workflows in parallel? Yes, it is possible to run workflows concurrently. That is a setting that the server administrator can change under the system settings area for the server. And the recommendation is always to have the number of concurrent workflows is the number of cores available on that machine is divided by 2. Usually, companies have that set to 2 workflows to run in parallel. Another question here. All the capacities for running workflows scheduled is provided by Alteryx itself regarding memory capacity. So Alteryx Server is a deployment on-premise. You will need to either have a machine to install Alteryx, or you can purchase like an EC2 instance on AWS, right, or Azure, and install Alteryx Server there. So it is a machine that you are going to manage, and then you can choose how much memory and CPU you want available for that machine. Another question here. Is there a way to report on job failure and create alert messages? Yes, it is possible to do that. You can create a event, right, within the workflow, and then you can trigger that event if the workflow runs with errors, if the workflow fails, right? And then you can trigger a email notification, or you can run a bat file or a command, right? We're gonna see how to do that on the next session, the best practice.